All right, our top focus on World DNA this morning after US President Joe Biden's threat to cut off weapons and artillery shell supply to Israel if it invades Rafah city of Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country is prepared to stand alone.
Well, we are going to be tracking this closely. We are going to be asking some pertinent questions with a guest who will be joining us later. As of now, in a video statement, he said, if we must, we shall fight with our fingernails. But we have much more than our fingernails. The Netanyahu government so far had maintained silence over Washington holding back a shipment of aerial bombs. But after Joe Biden's warning, he said, without specifically mentioning it, that if we must stand alone, we shall stand alone. Listen to this.
We are on the eve of our Independence Day. In the War of Independence 76 years ago, we were the few against the many. We did not have weapons. There was an arms embargo on Israel, but with great strength of spirit, heroism, and unity among us, we were victorious. Today, we are much stronger. We are determined and we are united in order to defeat our enemies and those who want to destroy us. If we need to stand alone, we will stand alone. I have said that, if necessary, we will fight with our fingernails. But we have much more than fingernails, and with that same strength of spirit, with God's help, together, we will win.
Netanyahu's statements were echoed by the other two voting members of his war cabinet, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and centrist former Defense Minister Benny Gantz. In his speech, Gallant categorically said that the state of Israel cannot be subdued. We will stand strong. We will achieve our goals. We will hit Hamas, we will hit Hezbollah.
Well, Gantz remarked on social media, and I'm going to quote here from that remark, the United States has a moral and strategic duty to extend to Israel the tools that are necessary for this mission.
I turn to Israel's enemies as well as to our best friends and say, the state of Israel cannot be subdued, not the IDF, not the defense establishment and not the state of Israel. We will stand strong, we will achieve our goals and we will hit Hamas, we will hit Hezbollah, we will achieve security.
Well, that was the statement by Yoav Gallant. Gallant's statement, it clearly underlines the scale of the standoff between the Biden administration and the Israeli government now.
Meanwhile, Palestinian residents said that Israeli forces bombarded areas of Rafah. An Israeli attack near a mosque killed at least 3 people and injured others in the eastern neighborhood. Video footage from the scene showed the minaret lying in the rubble and 2 bodies wrapped in blankets. An Israeli air strike on 2 houses in the Sabra neighborhood of Rafah killed at least 12 people, including women and children. Among the dead was the senior commander of the militant Al-Mujahideen brigades and the family of another group leader.
Israeli tanks seized control of the Palestinian side of the Rafah border, crossing with Egypt earlier this week, and are currently probing the outskirts of the nearby city of Rafah. Netanyahu has not so far ordered troops to enter the city, where Israel says 4 battalions of Hamas fighters are based.
On the other hand, the latest round of indirect negotiations in Cairo to halt hostilities in Gaza had ended. Hamas announced that its delegation attending the negotiations has left Cairo for Qatar, adding that the ball is now completely in Israel's court. The group said that it stood by the proposal submitted by the mediators, but Israel has rejected it.
And of course, the situation at the moment raises many questions. We're now being joined by Anoop Kling, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA.
Thank you for having me.
Now, sir, I want to begin by asking you, of course, talks have failed once again. Neither side is willing to compromise. We've seen the statements that are coming out of the United States as well. Israel, on the other hand, remains adamant, saying that if it has to stand alone, it will stand alone. The question here is, can Israel sustain this fight entirely on its own? And what is the reason for Israel being so adamant on the Rafah offensive?
Well, we do, in fact, find ourselves at a very precarious point in time. And I'm sure most of your viewers would agree that it's unfortunate that we cannot return to the days of October 6th, the day prior to the barbaric Hamas attack on Israel. But we find ourselves now at a point where I think Hamas is taking, the military wing of Hamas at least, it's taking its last breaths as the Israeli Defense Force is focusing its efforts to eliminating those last 4 battalions in and around Rafah. And of course, we know Hamas is surrounding itself with civilians and has its facilities actually, many of which are subterranean under civilian facilities. So Israel understands that it faces an existential threat if the Hamas military threat is not eliminated. And thus I believe that the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu and the war cabinet, which includes people that frankly are politically not supporters of the prime minister, they have resigned themselves to finishing the military mission of destroying Hamas. And that's what we are seeing now. And time will tell how long this operation will take.
Mr. Klink, where does Israel get its confidence from? Rather, where does Netanyahu get that confidence from that we'll stand alone if we have to? Everyone understands the dependency on the US arms and ammunitions. Where does that confidence come from?
Well, there's certainly some dependency, if you will, on American defense industry to supply Israel with certain types of weapons. I am confident in saying that the Israeli Defense Forces probably have enough stocks to last them for quite some time, based on the war stocks that they have accumulated over the years. And of course, the Israeli government has to demonstrate strength and its commitment to finishing the job that was forced upon them on October 7th when Hamas attacked. So this is also, I believe, a part of the Israeli negotiating strategy to get Hamas to free the hostages as part and parcel of a ceasefire. They have to maintain the military pressure on Hamas in order to have Hamas make concessions. Because remember, we're talking about a ceasefire. We very rarely, and this is very unfortunate in my view, talk about the plight of the Israeli hostages. And when one considers that what has become public in the last several days as word of the counter proposal that Hamas presented, you know, Hamas is actually now admitting that the total number of hostages, how many of them are still alive, is frankly in dispute. And this is, I think, something very serious for all of us to consider.
Right, sir. Another thing that I just wanted to gain clarity on, you mentioned that Hamas's military wing, it is breathing its last. That being said, some would argue that the Hamas ideology is still very much intact, and it's the humanitarian toll and the cost of this war that is now mounting, and which is the reason that it's now appears, without the United States support as well, that it's Israel against the world. So how do you see the situation panning out in that regard?
So you're right. You can't necessarily kill an ideology. You're absolutely right. I would say that, you know, throughout history, there have been times, obviously World War II being first, perhaps amongst historical examples, where the unconditional surrender of Nazism was required to bring to the World War II to an end. In terms of the ideology of Hamas, I personally believe, and there are many that support this view, that the tragedy that has befallen Gaza is due to Hamas's intransigence, to the fact that Hamas has vowed repeatedly to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. That position has not changed. Hamas's leaders continue to say if they had the opportunity to do the attacks of October 7th again, they would. So the only peaceful future, I think, that the residents of Gaza have any hope for is one that does not include the leadership of Hamas.
All right. Thank you so much for joining in, Mr. Klink. That was Eno Klink, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for East Asia, joining us from Washington, D.C. Pleasure speaking with you, sir.
Thank you.